My name is Joy McKarns, and I teach 8th grade language arts and live in Dayton, Ohio. About 10 years ago, I remember feeling very discouraged. Dayton was a rough place to live. The factories and many businesses were pulling out and going elsewhere. My students were suffering, and parents were losing their jobs. I watched as poverty and all the baggage of trauma and despair creep into my classroom. I remember confiding in my mother, a multi generational citizen from Dayton, that I hate this place. I want to move and flee to somewhere, anywhere else. My teacher mom calmly took my hand and looked me in the eye and said, "You hate this place because you have never taken the time to know this place." Then she gave me my homework. She sent me out to explore, to experience, and to learn. I started with the Wright brothers, Dayton's most famous citizens. I learned that two local ordinary bicycle enthusiasts who had no formal education could do what man had been trying to accomplish for the last 1,000 years. I learned what they dreamed through hard work, lots of hard work, would change the world forever. I learned that Dayton experienced one of the most devastating natural disasters in our nation in 1913, and through a great love of this community could not only survive and then thrive, but to go on to develop a flood prevention system that pioneered modern flood prevention engineering all over the world. I learned about an inspirational black writer that because of the color of his skin was kept from being published and employed as a writer. But because of local help and encouragement, our nation was gifted with the incredible writing of Paul Laurence Dunbar. I explored Huffman Prairie, the U.S. Air Force Museum, the Aviation Trail, and the story of John Patterson, and I will never stop. What I've learned is that I do come from a very inspirational place. I felt pride in being from Dayton, and I knew I wanted my students to experience the same feeling. I wanted them to know that part of them was rooted in the stories of these exceptional trailblazers. I went back to school and I sent them out to explore these sites with their families. Some went, some didn't. There was no money to take them on field trips. My students were struggling. Poverty, race, gender, and disability were all factors that needed to be overcome so that my students could be successful. So I began with the national parks. I built a relationship with the Dayton Aviation Heritage National Historical Park. I invited them to be part of my students' educational experience. They dove right in. They came to my classroom, they gave tours, they gave my students admissions to the parks that weren't free, and then the world opened up when they gave me the money for transportation, and I could finally bring my students to see for themselves. On one such field trip, I stood right here on Huffman Prairie, where the Wright brothers finished their invention. I love it when the kids stand there and gaze skyward. That year, a C-17, the world's second largest airplane from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, took off next to us and flew overhead. A young man watched in wonder as the gigantic plane sailed overhead, and he looked me in the eye and said words I'll never forget. He said, "Coming from Dayton makes me feel like I can do anything." Bingo. That was it. I was hooked. I knew that I would move mountains to make sure my students had every opportunity to experience that feeling of I can do anything. I love teaching the narrative of the Wright brothers. What I discovered I was doing was actually teaching the narrative of STEM education. Imagine that. Kids learning science, technology, engineering, and math in their language arts class. We read about it, we write about it, we explain it, and we explore it. I was given the opportunity to attend and then work as an instructor for Air Camp USA in my summers. This is an organization that is dedicated to exposing students to STEM opportunities. Their dream was my dream, and I couldn't get on board that train fast enough. Kids came from all over the country to learn STEM opportunities right here in the birthplace of aviation. I watched the importance of exposing students to opportunities outside of their own worlds. They can imagine themselves working as engineers, scientists, and explorers because they were put in that role. When funding from the national parks ran out for my field trips, it didn't matter. I already knew the importance of giving students these inspirational experiences. I began to write grants. The Women in Defense Foundation paid last year, and the Northmont Education Foundation will pay next year. I'll get them there no matter what, because it matters. Many students just don't get to see the world outside of their neighborhoods. My school takes hundreds of 8th grade students to Washington, D.C. every year. Many have never left their communities or even stayed in a hotel before. It is so energizing to see the wonder in their faces as they watch the changing of the guard at Arlington National Cemetery or stand on the spot where Martin Luther King delivered his I Have a Dream speech. I love project-based learning. My students take what they learn and they've created mini museum exhibits. They also had an invention convention style PBL where they became inventors themselves. I also love a competitive spirit, and students compete to put their projects on display in our local museums. They have the authentic learning experience of putting their museum exhibits in an actual museum. Then the Waco Airplane Museum got involved and offered the winning students scholarships to their aviation camp in the summer. Just Thursday, I watched 5 of my students who have never flown before take off in an open cockpit plane after a week of learning the science of aviation. This year, I was awarded the Henry Ford Foundation Innovative Teacher Award for 2020. This award recognized the dream I have of giving my students the experience of being innovators, inventors, dreamers, and future world changers. When we talk about equity, if our students aren't giving these experiences and inspiration, all the tutoring, modifications, and restorative practice and social emotional learning will stay packed in a suitcase that never gets to travel. If we want to influence educators to influence school culture and student outcomes, we have to give our educators the resources to help students experience as much as they can while we still have access to them. I believe any educator can look around and find inspiration in the place they live. When they find it with the right support, they can make those experiences happen for their students. When we anchor our students to their roots and to what their communities have to offer, we can untie that rope that holds them down and truly let them soar.